welcome to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show broadcast this week from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. I'm your host, Maret Gwyn. Every week, two members of the European Parliament step into the ring to debate some of the most pressing issues facing the European Union. This week, we're putting the spotlight once again on European farmers and asking whether their discontent risks flaring up once again. Luis Albertos has more.
For 2 years, farmers' anger has been spilling onto European streets. Their grievances, high operational costs, stringent environmental rules and fierce foreign competition. Under pressure, Brussels made major concessions, relaxing green farming obligations, ditching planned pesticide cuts and providing financial relief. But can farmers continue to count on political protection? European governments are now battling to protect the EU's flagship agricultural funds, known as the Common Agricultural Policy, from the proposed budget cuts of European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. Skyrocketing fertilizer costs due to the Hormuz Strait disruptions, a raft of free trade deals and persistent heat waves are also adding fuel to fire. Can Europe continue to put farmers at the center of their political agenda? Or will competing demands from defense spending to enlargement force the EU to make difficult choices?
Plenty there for our contenders to get their teeth into. Let's meet them.
Kieran Mullowly, an Irish MEP from the Liberal Renew Europe group. He's a vice chair of the Special Committee on Housing and a member of the Committees on Regional Development and Agriculture and Rural Development. Before becoming an MEP, he worked as a journalist for over 3 decades. Regarding the EU long-term budget, he said, "The Common Agricultural Policy must have a dedicated and robust budget of 433 billion euros, at least at current prices. CAP cannot be treated as a leftover or absorbed into national envelopes." Pekka Toveri, a Finnish MEP from the centre-right European People's Party. A retired general of the Finnish Defence Forces, he serves in the Committees on Security and Defence and Agriculture and Rural Development. He says the next MFF is requiring difficult choices. As more resources are needed towards new priorities such as security and defence, the next CAP needs to make every euro count by providing effective, well-targeted support for our farmers and strengthening Europe's food security.
Kieran Mullowly and Pekka Toveri, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Great to have you. Very, very relevant topic, farmers back in the political spotlight. Let me start with you, Kieran Mullowly. Tough negotiations happening now on the EU's next long-term budget. Will farmers' subsidies be protected?
I hope they will. I think that's the first issue, and I think Neca probably will agree with me that we need to put food security very high on our agenda. I get a sense already, as the Irish presidency starts, that there is an agreement across the board among the member states that food security is still very important. So I really hope they will. It will be a question of how we balance the books on this issue. Where will the deficit come from? Because farmers cannot cope with a loss of 20 to 24% in their subsidies.
Yet the EU's facing multiple challenges. You come from Finland, Mr. Toveri. Sharing the longest land border in the EU with Russia. We know about the defence and security threats. We know about the budget needed to fund those defence needs. Is it inevitable now that farmers may face cuts as the EU tries to address this threat?
Well, first of all, I have to say that, I'm coming from Finland, which 1866 to 68 was one of the last Western European countries with big famine. 8% of the population died because of famine. So we understand about food security and the importance of agriculture. But on the other hand, we also know the threat of Russia, and which is not only the eastern border countries, but the whole Europe. And therefore, we need to be stronger in security and defense, and that means everybody have to bid in also agriculture. And its most important thing is not how much you throw in money, but how you use the money.
You mentioned that member states seem intent on protecting farmers, but the Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen did propose a major cut. So does she really have farmers' interests at heart, would you say?
Well, I think the difficulty is not just the cap programme, but it's the policy of trade deals which Ursula von der Leyen has also pursued in Europe. You will know I'm bitterly opposed to the Mercosur trade deal, not of where it is now, because I think we're getting control on their standards, but where it could go in terms of replacing Irish farmers and French farmers and Finnish farmers, for that matter, in the markets going down the line. So it's a combination, really, of what I believe is an excessive rush to sign up trade deals alongside the CAP package at the moment. But let's be straight about this. If it goes ahead, there are significant implications. If you look at the actual cut that's proposed at the moment, and in terms of what it would do, it would reduce effectively the livestock herd in Europe. We've looked at the figures that Eurostat have given us over the last number of days. Based on the present MFF budget projection, we could be looking at a loss in the region of millions of cattle going down the line. And when you look at each country, including Finland, there is an important issue here. Food production is surely our first priority. If we have a 24% cut, it could take the food literally out of 23 million people's mouth over the course of 7 years. Now, nobody wants that.
Indeed. I want to pick up on what you said about the Mercosur free trade deal. We know that your party, the EPP, has been championing this agenda of striking various trade deals with different parts of the world. But is it an existential threat now to farmers, would you say?
I don't agree. You have to remember, true to my background, I'm a big picture guy. Farming is very important for Europe, but from the EU's economy, it's 1.2%. Still, we use about 30% of our budget to support farming. Where that money comes? It comes from the 98.8% of other trade and industry, which is providing that money. Mercosur was 94% of anything else but agriculture. Only 6% was agriculture, and it also opened markets for European agriculture to South America. So I think that we need this kind of deals because we are challenged by not only by Russia and China, but the United States too.
So the pros of Mercosur outweighs the cons, Toveri says.
I think the main issue with Irish farmers and indeed Finnish farmers had with Mercosur was the lack of equivalence. We're looking at two member states producing food on a different system. In Brazil, without the standards, without the testing, without the audits, we found that out. That's why they're no longer on the safe food list in Europe at the moment.
I want to pick up on how this debate has become so politicised. Would you say that this debate has become too politicised and that we're losing sight of the real concrete concerns of farmers on the ground, including in Finland?
Well, we saw what happened in the Mercosur voting. In EPP, all the French and Polish MEPs voted against it. All the French MEPs in all the parties voted against it, even though all the studies show that Mercosur is good for the economy of France. Why? Because there's elections coming and nobody wants to give any room for any populist party bringing in the farmers' votes. So the strategic picture, the big picture, is thrown away because of narrow national political issues. And big issue here is that Europe hasn't prepared for decades properly the world we are living in. The energy prices are crazy because we are still depending on fossil fuels. The fertilizer prices are crazy because we are depending either from the dictatorships or fertilizers coming from an area which has always been volatile and full of crises. So we have to prepare and make sure that the whole chain, food production chain, is protected and the prices are adequate so that the farmers can make a living out of it.
But when we talk about food security, MEP Maloli, do you think it's fair to say that European consumers might need to be prepared to pay more in order to ensure food security, local produce and so on?
Well, I think firstly, if Europe does not support the industry to the manner it should do, they will have to pay more. That's a fact. But I think the important issue here is to remember where we've come from. You know, it is a cliche, I know, and it's often used that Europe is now going for tanks instead of tractors. This is thrown out. But you've got to look behind that phrase at the historic background to this. When we joined the European Union back in 1973, agriculture was the reason we came in. It was nothing to do with defence. At that point in time, 72% of the European budget was spent on agriculture. It's now down to 20-25%. And while I understand, and there's a balance to be hit here, I understand the world has changed, the geopolitical events have happened, and we do need to be very careful in terms of defence. We play our part as peacekeepers in the world as well, remember. But also remember, we feel it's the pendulum has swung too far, that at the end of the day, food security is important. When the COVID hit, farmers continued to produce. When the Ukraine conflict began, farmers continued to produce. So why should we pick on that industry now? And not just the defence budget, but other budgets. I'm not just picking out defence, by the way. I think the competitiveness budget needs to be defined a little bit more. We see exactly where that's going to go before we take it away from agriculture.
Would you agree that the EU is perhaps losing sight of its original purpose, which is to serve farmers, for example?
Well, as my dear colleague said, we are living in a different world than it was in 1970s. And if we don't change how we operate as an EU, we will lose. And then nobody is happy, not farmers, not the industrial workers, not anybody. So we have to make things differently. And my experience from my previous life is that seeing a problem and throwing a lot of money to it normally doesn't work. You have to think very carefully what you do money, and the money have to be used so that you get the results what you want from that money. In this case, we have to secure, for example, young farmers, because being a farmer is a dying trade in Europe, and we have to stop by making it lucrative for young people to start farming so that they can make a living out of it.
Which is why, Pekka, we probably should invest more now in generational renewal. So let's up the farming budget, put in money to let farmers retire and bring in young farmers. So you want to bring it down, or others want to bring it down, perhaps, at the present. Von der Leyen certainly wants to bring it down. So why not invest with me in generational renewal?
Well, we in EPP, we want to use a bigger part of the cap money for young farmers, because that's the reason.
OK, I'm sure we can pick up on that issue of young farmers hopefully later in the show, but let me stop you there for now. I see you're getting warmed up, but it's time for us to move on to the next round and to take the gloves off. In this round, we give you both the opportunity to directly challenge each other. I know you've come prepared with questions today, so let's start with you, Pekka Toveri. Your first question to Kieran Maloli.
So, we both agree that Europe must do more for our farmers. With growing spending needs for other priorities such as security, which EU priorities would you cut to restore the CAP budget, or would you grow the EU membership fees?
Yeah, so straight away, I think I've just touched on it. Competitiveness is a new budget, and it's important. I read the Mario Draghi report like everybody else, but it's 450 billion. It's an awful lot of money. And at the moment, in my mind, it's not defined clearly where it's going to go. So I would look at that firstly. That's the first area I would hit on. Remember what's happened in defence and space and that area. We've gone from where we were spending just 14 billion up to where we are now, over 70. I mean, do we need to go that far? That's the question I ask. Is the race to space more important than the race to have food on the tables in Finland and in Ireland? I don't think it is. So those are the key areas I would look more closer at in terms of determining where the budget deficit would come from.
OK. Kieran Maloli, your first question to your opponent, Pekka Toveri.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you have consistently argued that Europe should invest. Now, I respect that. I also respect the work you've done as a former general and your own professional career. But I suppose I would argue that when one looks around Europe, and even at Finland, where, you know, in recent years you've seen an issue of deprivation among children, where up to 10%, I believe, of children in Finland have come up to a point where they're suffering from deprivation. That's food on the table. So what I would argue to you is that your domestic agenda, it should be seen on a par with any concerns about defence. And particularly I would argue that food security is national security at the end of the day.
Well, I have to say that I agree, totally. You know, we can, in time of crisis, we can live about max 3 days without water, a couple of weeks without food, without electricity much longer. So yes, food security is very important for our security, and we have to safeguard that. And again, the money have to go to the right places. And it's not only, we have to remember that this house is for legislation. You don't always have to throw money on the problems. You can also make legislation to improve the condition of the farming and make it easier, less bureaucracy, less restrictions for the farmers, so that they can concentrate what they are doing the best, bringing food to the table.
Your second question now to MEP Kieran Maloli.
So the real crisis is not only funding, it is that young people are leaving farming, as we discussed already. If you had to choose, would you prioritize supporting existing farms or bringing a new generation into agriculture?
A very good question, and I think we've touched on it already in this debate. They are equally important, but I suppose look at the average age across Europe. We have a major problem on the upper end. So we have farmers up at 57, 58 years of age, the average in Europe at the moment. It's far too high. The industry, I think, ultimately is doomed. So my first priority would be to deal with that issue with strong investment supports. Firstly, to let farmers get out. So a retirement package for farmers to leave. That would be my first priority. And then secondly, a package, particularly in Ireland, where we have a lot of young farmers coming in who need to get investment for new machinery, to buy land, to get a first step on the ladder. We've traditionally had a problem in land being handed over to the next generation. But I think if the funding is available, and Commissioner Christoph says on a regular basis that he is going to prioritise it, I would like to see investment in that generation renewal going right up to 10% in the next package.
OK. Kieran Maloney, your final question.
Yeah, I suppose in general, Europe has managed to increase the defence expenditure dramatically. So I can understand, and I can understand why. I'm not blind to what's going on in Europe. But why can't Europe also maintain, what I think, a properly funded common agricultural policy at the end of the day? In other words, do you think, Pekka, within the Council of Ministers, when the ministers meet, is it a lack of understanding of agriculture, or is it perhaps a lack of a will to contribute to farming ahead, as I say, of pressing defence issues at the moment?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge is that we are working too much on the silos, that we don't look this as a broad problem as it is. Farming is much more than just CAP. We have to take care of the regulation and other actions so that, as I mentioned before, that we have affordable energy for farmers, we have affordable fertilizers for the farmers, etc. And when we look at the defence, the fact is that the major burden on the defence is on the member states, of course. They are paying the biggest bill. But again, it would be good to have a proper analysis and wide view on so that we do this strategically, creating environment for farming in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time is also functioning. And the same when we are building our defence capabilities, same thing. If you don't have a good plan, how are you going to use the money? And it's the same in the defence industry. There's a lot of things we can do without throwing money in the defence industry by just taking down the regulations and our legislative restrictions we have. And there the biggest problem is the member states, because there again the narrow national political interests come to play, and there's always somebody out of 27 who said that, well, we can't allow this and this legislation to change because their national interest.
Well, would you agree with, say, Donald Tusk, who was asked about this question? He said it's always the big countries who are the Scrooges when this happens. They want to go back and raid the European budget and shrink it instead of dealing with their responsibilities as the larger member states.
Well, yes, I agree. Coming from a small country, I can see that we see the big picture in Finland much better than Germans or French have.
We've heard plenty from our two contenders now, but it's time to bring in a new voice. I'd like to pivot now to consider the impact of climate change on European farming communities and bring in Teresa Ribera, the European Commission Vice President for a clean, just and competitive transition. In an interview with The Guardian last week, she was asked about the recent heat waves that have struck many parts of Europe, of course. She said, "I am tired of hearing people don't back the Green Deal anymore. It's not true. People prefer to ensure fresh water that is not polluted, breathe clean air or count on a healthy ecosystem than having polluted water or no capacity to ensure crops and harvests. There is still this fierce fight against facts, science, preparedness and investment. We need to reject this kind of BS," she said, "based on lies and against people's interests." Is she right? Has the Green Deal now been demonised? And I will press you here. Have farmers played a role in that?
I think farmers have played a key role in this. I totally reject what the Commissioner says, by the way. The facts are that farmers have been the custodians of the environment for generations. I mean, if you just deal with this in terms of common sense, what the Commissioner says in terms of water quality, it's not in the interest of a farmer to have polluted water in the river at the end of his farm, thereby causing a threat to his own animals. It threatens his own industry. And for generations, my family and others have defended the environment. We played our part in the environmental schemes. The issue for us is that when we're spending more on the environmental schemes than we're spending on basic food production and generational renewal, that's when it becomes a problem.
Would you agree? Have farmers been targeted too much in this debate around the Green Deal?
Yeah, I do agree. You know, at least in Finland, where the farm sizes are much smaller than in Central Europe, for example, you know, they have lived there for centuries. They know the nature. Finns love the nature. They want to protect. They don't want to destroy anything just for farming. And we have a lot of problems, and we have to remember that one size doesn't fit all. You know, when you look at the solutions, because Finland is an Arctic country, totally different place to farming than in southern Spain, for example. And we have a lot of areas where you have 2 centimeters of productive soil left because the quality of the farmland has gone down. So we have to look at the science to find the solution. And one solution, in my opinion, is not to go these big, giant industrial farms with thousands of hectares, because those companies don't care so much about the environment.
Interesting point of agreement there. But it's time now for me to take us to a break here on The Ring. But we'll be back with more after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show. I'm Marit Gwyn, and I'm joined today by Kieran Maloley from the centrist Renew Europe group and Pekka Toveri from the European People's Party. Today, our topic is European farmers and the multiple challenges they face. Now, there is increasing political momentum now behind efforts to accept new members into the European Union. But what impact would this have on farming subsidies? Well, there are a few theories about how the EU's common agricultural policy could adapt to accommodate new members, such as Ukraine. Let's take a closer look at some of them. So these are 3 theories floating around. The first is that we could have an increased budget for farmers, costing the EU between 7.6 and 13.4 billion euros more per year. Secondly, we could see the eligibility criteria tightening a bit, meaning some farmers, notably in Western Europe, could see cuts to the current levels of subsidies they receive. And third, a potential reduced per hectare payment, meaning all farmers receiving equally less, but which could hit heavily dependent Baltic and Eastern European states hardest. So, a very sensitive and political debate here, but first you, Kieran Maloley. Ukraine joining the EU, is this good or bad news for farmers?
Well, let me say firstly, I represent the farmers in Ireland, so I'm opposed full stop to a reduction in our subsidies or in our single farm payments. That doesn't mean I don't understand the invitation to Ukraine to come on board. That doesn't mean I don't understand the contribution the farmers can make to Europe. But we have to remember that in full production, the output from Ukraine would master both France and Italy put together in an annual year. So clearly the first option is going to have to come into play. They're going to have to look at the budget. The Irish presidency has already discussed this. They're going to look at it in the early stages. We've got to start now. I think we're some distance away from Ukraine actually coming to that point. If it happens, they have a lot of issues to resolve in their own country aside from the Russian conflict. But clearly the budget is going to have to be re-looked at, and it cannot mean a reduction of subsidies for farmers in Western Europe.
But yet we've just discussed about how it's very difficult now to increase any budget because money is scarce. But what about this idea, Pekka Toveri, of Ukraine potentially joining as a member, but as a first stage not getting access to any CAP funding, to any farm subsidies? Would that be fair for Ukraine?
I don't think it's fair, but on the other hand, we have to see that Ukraine is a unique country, and we have to find the unique solutions for it. I'm the chair of the Ukraine delegation here in the EU Parliament. I have met them a lot. We have discussed with the Ukrainian farmers a lot, and they always remind that they don't want to be the ones who block Ukraine's possible EU membership. And they also point out that before the Russian attack, over 90% of Ukraine's farming production, agricultural production, went outside Europe, and they want to continue that. And then when we look at the size, already the cap has, the suggestion for the cap has limits on how, on the size of the farms, that bigger farms don't get any support. In Finland, the small to medium farms are around 80 hectares. In Ukraine, there are 2,000 hectares. So it's a totally different thing. We can't use our own rules, current rules on Ukraine.
But any solution, I guess, cannot discriminate against Ukrainian farmers. And it means that if there's no agreement on increasing the budget, then everyone could see cuts. You're saying that that would be politically untenable? I
think it would be untenable until such a time as we have standards in Ukraine. That's the first issue. Now, more than Mercosur countries, we know nothing about their production standards, their auditing, their testing, their animal welfare issues. At the moment, we certainly don't believe they're on European standards. That's the first issue you've got to resolve. So I believe it could be a way forward to come in without access to CAP initially. That certainly is an option that the Irish presidency, I'm sure, could look at, and indeed in future years. But the bottom line here is, going forward, you know, I voted against the Mercosur trade deal for one simple issue. Because of the issue Pekka has mentioned, the scale of farming in Brazil is off the charts compared to the normal European farmer. 4,000 and 5,000 hectares of land across thousands of miles. It's just not comparable. Therefore, we need a different system in terms of looking at how we support them. We're certainly not going to support them per hectare.
And again, yet, Ukraine, if I may, is it's being framed as a geopolitical necessity to integrate them into the EU. Do you fear that this issue over farming could be a major stumbling block?
We can't allow it to be. It's a big challenge, but we had the big challenge when Poland joined the EU. And now they have increased their GDP for 16%. They are the military power of Eastern Europe, very important for our defense. When you talk about Ukraine, they had a good point when last time we talked with the Ukrainian farmers that if they have to go immediately to the EU standards, that means 150 euros per hectare more production cost, which means that they can't compete in the global market anymore. And if we do that, if we demand that, then we have to substitute them as European farmers. Other solution might be, okay, those companies which are exporting outside Europe, maybe they can continue with the non-EU standards. And those who plan to import to Europe, they have to follow the standards.
Well, that would certainly be unprecedented for the EU. We'll see.
Well, we have living in different times, so we have to find different solutions.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much. It's now time for us to move on to our fifth and final round. And in our last round, we do something a little different. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I require a one-word answer, yes or no. Are you ready?
Sure.
We'll do our best.
Let me start with you, Pekka Toveri. Should the EU maintain farmers' subsidies at the same level as previous years?
Yes.
Difficult one. Yes. And you?
Yes, with the inflation added.
OK. Should farmers do more to tackle climate change?
I think farmers are doing yes.
Yes.
Does Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission chief, have farmers' interests at heart?
Yes.
No, I'm afraid.
Is the Mercosur free trade deal an existential threat to European farmers?
Absolutely yes.
No.
Should consumers expect to pay more to support European farmers, to pay more in the supermarkets?
No.
Less production will mean higher prices, yes.
Is Europe losing its food sovereignty?
Yes, really, because of the trade deals.
No.
And finally, is the EU risking at least leaving farmers behind?
Yes, is the problem with that budget.
No.
OK, very interesting. Many points of disagreement there at the end. But thank you so much to you both for a very lively debate here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. We hope to have you back on the ring very soon. But that brings this edition to an end. Thank you again, Kieran Maloli. Thank you, Pekka Toveri. And of course, thank you to our audience at home. Remember, you can continue the conversation by sending us your feedback and comments to thering@euronews.com. In the meantime, take care and stay with us here on Euronews.